Chapter 1. Why Hard Work Stops Working and No One Warns You. Let's talk honestly for a minute. Not motivational honestly. Not you can do anything honestly. Just real honestly. If hard work alone made people wealthy, you would already be there. You probably know people who work harder than almost anyone else you've ever met. They wake up early, they stay late, they don't complain much, they handle responsibility, they show up even when they don't feel like it. And yet, they're tired, stressed, and still checking their bank account before making basic decisions. That's not a character flaw. That's not laziness. That's not lack of intelligence. That's a rule problem. Because at some point in life, quietly without ceremony, the rules change. And almost no one tells you. When you were younger, effort worked. If you studied harder, your grades went up. If you practiced more, you improved. If you followed instructions, you advanced. So your nervous system learned a very clean lesson. Effort equals progress. That lesson got rewarded over and over again. So of course you carried it into adulthood. Why wouldn't you? You worked harder at your job. You took on more responsibility. You tried to be reliable. You tried to be valuable. And at first it seemed like it was working. Then one day, without realizing it, effort stopped turning into momentum. You didn't fall behind. You didn't fail. You just leveled off. And this is where things get dangerous, because when effort stops working, most people don't question the system. They question themselves. They think, maybe I'm not working hard enough. Maybe I need another certification. Maybe I need to push more. Maybe I need to sacrifice more. So they do. And the strange thing is, the system likes this. The system loves people who try harder when it stops paying them more. Because those people become reliable, predictable, dependable. They become pillars, and pillars don't move. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. The harder you work in a role that doesn't scale, the more trapped you become. Not punished, not attacked, just stuck. Because effort without leverage doesn't lead to freedom, it leads to responsibility. And responsibility feels like progress until you realize it isn't. Think about this carefully. Have you ever noticed that the people who are the most exhausted are often not the most paid? That's not random. That's because effort is not the same thing as value. Effort is internal. Value is external. Effort is how hard you feel like you're trying. Value is how easily you can be replaced. And this is where people get emotionally stuck, because they were taught that trying hard is morally good. So when the rewards don't come, they don't get curious. They get loyal. They stay. They wait. They hope someone notices. And slowly, without realizing it, they build their life around endurance instead of expansion. Let's pause here, because this part matters. If you feel a slight tension listening to this, if something in you is thinking, that's uncomfortable, but true, good, that means you're seeing the crack. Hard work didn't betray you. It just stopped being the deciding factor. And the moment effort stops being the deciding factor, ceilings start forming. Not because you're incapable, but because you're playing a game that quietly stopped rewarding the thing you're best at. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about why people don't just get stuck. They stabilize, and how your own mind learns to protect a certain income level without you realizing it. That's where things start getting really interesting. Chapter 2. The Income Thermostat, Why Progress Makes You Nervous. Let me ask you something that almost no one asks out loud. Have you ever noticed that when things finally start going well, you feel a little uneasy, not excited, not relieved? Uneasy, like you're waiting for something to go wrong, like the ground under you isn't quite solid yet. Most people assume that feeling means they're being smart, cautious, responsible. But what if that feeling is actually the thing that keeps them stuck? Imagine your life has a temperature setting, not the weather, not the economy, your internal setting, a range that feels like me. Below it, you feel stressed. Above it, you feel tense. That range becomes your financial home. And without realizing it, your mind works very hard to keep you there. This is what I mean by an income thermostat. It doesn't live in your bank account. It lives in your nervous system. You don't consciously decide it. You absorb it from family, from environment, from what you saw growing up, from what people around you consider normal. And once it's set, it quietly governs your behavior. Here's how it shows up. Someone gets a raise. Nothing dramatic, just a noticeable bump. For the first few weeks, they feel proud. Then something shifts. They start spending a little more. They upgrade something. They relax their discipline, not because they're reckless, but because abundance feels unfamiliar. The extra money feels like it's not really theirs yet, so the system self-corrects. Another person starts a side project. At first it's exciting, then it begins to work. And right when momentum builds, they hesitate. They delay sending the email. They postpone the next step. They get busy with something else. They tell themselves they're not rushing it, but really they're regulating discomfort, because growth isn't just financial, it's emotional. Here's the part people don't expect. Progress feels unsafe when it moves faster than your identity. Your mind wants consistency more than it wants success. Consistency feels like control. So when income starts climbing above your familiar range, your system doesn't celebrate. It asks questions. Can I maintain this? What if I mess this up? What will people expect from me now? What if this doesn't last? Those questions don't feel like fear. They feel like logic. But they're not neutral. They're protective. And protection often looks like slowing down. This is why so many people experience life in plateaus instead of slopes. Up, pause, normalize, repeat. They don't fall back. They just stop climbing. And because nothing bad happens, they assume this is as far as they go. Let me tell you something subtle but important. Your income level is not just a number, it's a story. It's the story you tell yourself about. What kind of life you're allowed to live? What level of responsibility you can handle? What kind of person you are? When income threatens to rewrite that story, the mind resists. Not aggressively, quietly. It sounds like, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's be realistic. This is probably temporary. I don't want to mess up a good thing. Those phrases feel mature, grounded, smart, but they're often the thermostat doing its job. Here's where it gets really interesting. Most people think they're afraid of failure, but many are actually afraid of success without a familiar script. Failure has a script. You know what to say. You know how people respond. You know who you are. Success removes the script. And when the script disappears, identity gets shaky. So the mind gently pulls the temperature back to what feels known. No drama, no collapse, just stabilization. That's why people can work hard for years and feel like nothing ever breaks. Because nothing breaks, it settles. Now here's the important part. The part that gives you power instead of pressure. This thermostat is not permanent, it's learned, which means it can be raised. But you don't raise it by forcing action. You raise it by noticing your reactions, by catching the moment you pull back, by staying present when progress feels uncomfortable, by not immediately self-correcting downward. The first step isn't doing more, it's letting more be okay. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about something that makes this even clearer. Why familiar struggle often feels safer than unfamiliar success, and how people accidentally build their identity around trying instead of expanding. That's where a lot of hidden self-sabotage lives. Chapter 3. Why struggle feels like home and success feels strange. There's a strange loyalty people develop to their struggle, not because they enjoy it, not because they want to suffer, but because struggle is familiar. You know how to struggle. You know how to wake up tired and still push through. You know how to explain why things are hard. You know how to justify delays, compromises, and waiting. Struggle has a script, and scripts are comforting. Success, on the other hand, doesn't come with instructions. No one tells you how to be when things actually start working. So let's talk about something most people never say out loud. When life has been hard for a long time, struggle becomes part of who you are. You're the hard worker, the survivor, the one who's trying, the one who doesn't quit. Those identities feel strong, even noble. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Success threatens that identity because success removes the struggle story. And when the story disappears, the mind asks a scary question. Who am I now? That question creates hesitation, not dramatic hesitation. Subtle hesitation. You don't quit. You don't sabotage, obviously. You just hesitate at the edge. You delay a decision. You soften your ambition. You stay reasonable. You tell yourself you're being careful. But what you're really doing is protecting an identity that's familiar. Think about this. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to bond with people over struggle? Long hours, low pay, stress, frustration. There's camaraderie there. But success isolates. When you start doing better than your environment expects, conversations change. Energy shifts. People joke differently. Some encourage you quietly. Others pull back quietly. And even if no one says anything negative, your nervous system notices the difference. It asks, will I still belong if I change? Belonging is older than ambition, deeper than money, stronger than logic. So the mind makes a trade without asking you. It trades expansion for familiarity. Not forever, just for now. And for now turns into years. Here's something important. Most people don't sabotage success because they're afraid of failing. They sabotage it because success asks them to become someone new. Someone with different boundaries, different conversations, different expectations. And that feels lonely before it feels empowering. So they hover. They stay close enough to growth to feel hopeful, but far enough away to feel safe. That's the invisible stall. This is also why people romanticize struggle. They say things like, I like the grind. I'm just built for hard work. I don't need much. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's a defense, because struggle doesn't require expansion. It just requires endurance. And endurance doesn't force you to confront who you might become if things actually worked. Let's slow this down for a moment. If part of you feels a little exposed right now, that's okay. This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about noticing patterns you were never taught to see. You didn't choose struggle as an identity. It formed naturally, from experience, from environment, from necessity. But here's the shift that changes everything. Struggle is not who you are. It's just what you learned how to do. And what you learned, you can outgrow. In the next chapter, we're going to look at how early conditioning trained people to be manageable instead of valuable, and why breaking that conditioning is one of the biggest steps toward breaking income ceilings. Chapter 4. You were trained to be manageable, not valuable. Let's talk about something that runs so deep most people never question it. You were trained to be manageable, not intentionally, not maliciously, just systematically. From the moment you were young, the reward system was very clear. Sit still, follow instructions, do what you're told. Don't cause problems. And if you do those things consistently, you're labeled good. Good student, good employee, good kid. That training works beautifully for creating order, but it has a hidden side effect. It teaches you to optimize for approval instead of value. Think about it. In school, the goal wasn't to create impact. It was to meet expectations. The assignment had a rubric. The test had right answers. The teacher decided what success looked like. So you learned to ask, what do they want? How do I not mess this up? What's the safest way to get a good outcome? That mindset doesn't disappear when school ends. It follows people straight into adulthood, into jobs, into careers, into income ceilings. People show up to work trying to be easy to manage. They respond quickly. They follow rules. They don't challenge too much. They don't rock the boat. And again, this isn't wrong. It's just limited. Because the marketplace doesn't reward manageability. It rewards value. And value is a very different thing. Value is about outcomes, about results, about impact. Value is about solving problems that matter, not just completing tasks correctly. Here's where the confusion happens. People assume that if they are useful, they will be rewarded. So they become very, very useful. They become the person who always says yes, fixes things quietly, covers gaps, keeps everything running, and suddenly everyone relies on them, which feels good, until they realize something painful. They're needed, but not elevated. They've become essential to the system, and that makes them harder to promote, harder to replace, and easier to underpay. This is the paradox of manageability. The more smoothly you fit into the system, the more the system wants to keep you exactly where you are. Because systems don't promote what they can't afford to lose, This is where income ceilings quietly form, not because you're not capable of more, but because you've been rewarded your whole life for not disrupting anything. Let me say this carefully. Value is not about being agreeable. Value is about being irreplaceable. And irreplaceable doesn't mean overworked. It means distinct. It means you do something that moves the needle, something that reduces pain, something that increases results. People who break income ceilings eventually stop asking, how can I do this perfectly? And start asking, what actually matters here? That shift feels dangerous at first, because when you move from manageability to value, approval becomes less consistent. Not everyone likes it when you stop playing small. Not everyone feels comfortable when you question assumptions. Not everyone applauds when you prioritize impact over compliance. And for someone trained to be good, that discomfort feels wrong. It feels like you're doing something risky, something selfish, something inappropriate. But that feeling is conditioning, not truth. Here's a subtle but important distinction. Manageable people wait to be told what matters. Valuable people decide. Manageable people focus on effort. Valuable people focus on outcomes. Manageable people avoid friction. Valuable people solve it. And income follows value far more reliably than it follows effort. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant. It doesn't mean ignoring responsibility. It doesn't mean disrespect. It means shifting your internal compass from, am I doing this right? To, is this actually moving anything? That question alone begins to stretch ceilings. Because once you stop optimizing for approval, you start seeing opportunities you couldn't see before. Opportunities that don't fit neatly into job descriptions. Opportunities that require initiative. Opportunities that involve risk. Not recklessness, but ownership. And ownership is something the system doesn't hand out easily. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about a belief that quietly locks people into income caps, even tighter than manageability does. The idea that time is their most valuable asset, and why that belief keeps so many capable people trapped. Chapter 5. Time is not your most valuable asset, and believing that keeps you stuck. Let's gently challenge something you've probably heard your entire life. Time is your most valuable asset. It sounds wise, responsible, mature, and on the surface, it feels true. Time is limited. You can't get it back. You should protect it. All of that makes sense. But here's the problem no one explains. If time is the thing you trade for money, then your income has a hard ceiling built into it. Because no matter how disciplined you are, no matter how motivated, no matter how efficient, you only get 24 hours in a day. And if money only comes in when time goes out, growth eventually stops. This is where people get quietly trapped. They become very good at managing time, optimizing schedules, squeezing productivity, and for a while that works. They feel in control, they feel responsible, they feel like adults. But then they hit a strange wall. There's no more room, no more hours, no more energy, no more margin. And instead of questioning the structure, they question themselves. I just need to be more disciplined. I need better time management. I need to wake up earlier. So they push harder, and life gets tighter. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Time-based thinking creates survival, not expansion. When your income is tied directly to your hours, you're always negotiating with exhaustion. You're always trading presence for progress, energy for earnings, health for hope. And you don't notice the trap because it looks responsible. It looks like adulthood. But there's a reason the most burned out people you know are often the ones who believe most strongly that time is everything. They're guarding the wrong asset. Let's slow this down. The people who break income ceilings don't magically get more time. They get more leverage. Leverage is when effort continues to produce results after the effort is done. Leverage is when one decision, one skill, one system keeps working without you standing over it. But here's why this is hard to accept. Leverage feels abstract. Time feels concrete. You can feel time passing. You can measure hours. You can control schedules. Leverage requires faith before proof, and most people were trained to trust what they can control, not what they can build. So they cling to time. They fill it, protect it, sell it carefully, and without realizing it, they accept a ceiling that time will never let them cross. This is also why people say things like, "I don't have time for that. I'll do it when things slow down. I just need to get through this phase." But things don't slow down. Time doesn't open up, it fills. Because time is not the resource that creates freedom. Capacity is. Your capacity to make decisions, your capacity to create value, your capacity to handle uncertainty, your capacity to let outcomes happen without micromanaging them. People who grow stop asking, "How do I fit this into my schedule?" and start asking, "How do I make this work without constant input?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Here's something most people never realize until much later. The goal isn't to protect your time forever. The goal is to buy your time back. And the only way to do that is to stop selling it so directly. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about something that sounds smart, but quietly keeps people locked in place. The belief that saving alone will create freedom, and why playing defense with money often prevents people from ever playing offense. Chapter 6. Why saving feels safe but rarely sets you free. Saving money is one of the first adult behaviors most people are praised for. You open a savings account, you build an emergency fund, you avoid unnecessary spending, and for good reason. Saving creates stability, it reduces panic, it gives you breathing room. But here's the part almost no one explains clearly. Saving is a defensive move. It protects what already exists. It does not expand what's possible. And when people confuse safety with progress, ceilings harden. This is where a lot of smart, disciplined people get stuck. They do everything right. They budget. They avoid debt. They plan ahead. And yet, life still feels narrow. Opportunities feel risky. Decisions feel heavy. Growth feels dangerous. Because saving teaches you how to preserve, not how to expand. And preservation is not the same thing as freedom. Let's talk about the emotional side of this. When you save, you feel responsible, you feel mature, you feel in control. That feeling is addictive, especially if you've ever experienced instability. So the mind begins to prioritize safety over possibility. You start asking, what's the safest choice? How do I avoid mistakes? What if this doesn't work? Those questions feel wise, but they quietly lock you into a small operating range. Because growth requires exposure, not recklessness, not gambling, but exposure. Exposure to uncertainty. Exposure to learning curves. Exposure to temporary discomfort. Saving reduces exposure. That's its job. So when saving becomes the primary strategy, progress slows. This is why people can have money in the bank and still feel trapped. They have security, but not momentum. And momentum is what changes lives. Here's something subtle but important. People who break income ceilings don't stop saving. They stop relying on saving as their path forward. They understand that savings is a foundation, not a destination. They use safety to support growth, not replace it. But for many people, the moment money feels protected, curiosity shuts down. They stop asking, what could I build? What could I learn? What could I expand into? Because curiosity feels dangerous when safety becomes the priority. There's also a hidden fear here. If saving is your main strategy, you don't have to test yourself. You don't have to find out what you're capable of creating. You don't have to risk discovering limits. You just hold on. And holding on feels like progress until years pass and nothing changes. Let me be clear. This isn't about spending recklessly. It's not about ignoring responsibility. It's about understanding the role each tool plays. Saving protects the present. Expansion creates the future. And confusing the two keeps people quietly contained. In the next chapter, we're going to shift from external strategies to internal ones and talk about something that controls income more than effort, time, or savings ever will. Identity. Chapter 7. You don't rise to goals, you fall to identity. Most people believe that setting bigger goals will change their life. So they write goals, they visualize, they plan. And for a little while it works. They feel motivated, focused, hopeful. Then something strange happens. The excitement fades. Old habits return. Momentum slows. And people assume they lack discipline. But discipline was never the real issue. Identity was. Here's the truth most people never hear clearly. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. Identity is not what you say you want. It's what feels normal for you to have, handle, and maintain. It's the quiet answer to the question, what kind of person am I? And that answer governs your behavior far more than any goal ever will. If someone sees themselves as a struggler, they will unconsciously create struggle. If someone sees themselves as not a money person, they will avoid financial growth. If someone sees wealth as dangerous or stressful, they will never let it stay. This doesn't happen loudly, it happens subtly. You procrastinate, you overthink, you hesitate, you choose comfort over expansion, and you tell yourself you're being reasonable. Here's why identity is so powerful. Your mind's primary job is not success. It's consistency. It wants your actions to match your self-image. When your behavior starts moving outside of that image, the mind pulls you back, not because it hates you, because it's trying to protect you from unfamiliar territory. This is why people self-sabotage right when things start working. They get close to a new level and then create friction. They miss an opportunity. They delay a decision. They make an emotional choice that resets the game, and afterward, they feel confused. What happened? I was doing so well. What happened is simple. Their identity couldn't keep up with their momentum. Think about this. If someone who has always struggled suddenly experiences ease, the nervous system panics. Ease feels suspicious, like it won't last, like it doesn't belong. So the system restores familiarity. This is why repeating affirmations without identity work feels hollow. You can say, I am wealthy all day. But if wealth doesn't feel like you, your behavior will reject it. Real change happens when identity expands first, not through force, through evidence, through small wins that stick, through consistency, through decisions that reinforce a new self-image. Identity changes when you prove something to yourself repeatedly, not once, not dramatically, but quietly. In the next chapter, we're going to explore a hidden fear that keeps identity small, one most people never admit to themselves, the fear of being seen. Chapter 8, the fear of being seen, why visibility feels dangerous. There's a fear most people don't recognize as fear. It doesn't feel like panic. It doesn't feel like anxiety. It doesn't even feel negative. It feels like caution. And because it feels responsible, it goes unquestioned. The fear is this: being seen, not literally, emotionally, being seen doing better, being seen trying something new, being seen stepping outside your old lane. Most people think money is the scary part. It's not. Visibility is. Because visibility changes how people relate to you. When you're struggling, expectations are low. When you're trying, people root for you. When you're surviving, no one watches too closely. But when you start to succeed, people look. They notice. They form opinions. They project expectations. And suddenly, your life doesn't feel as private anymore. This is where many people unconsciously pull back. They don't stop completely. They just dim the lights. They downplay wins. They soften ambition. They make jokes to shrink themselves back to size. They say things like, I just got lucky. It's not that big of a deal. I'm still figuring it out. On the surface, it looks like humility, but often it's self-protection, because being visible means being judged, and judgment feels dangerous to a nervous system trained for belonging. Let's be honest for a moment. Have you ever hesitated to fully go for something because of how it might look if it worked? Not if it failed. If it worked, because success changes the social contract. Some people celebrate you. Some people question you. Some people distance themselves. Some people get uncomfortable. And even if no one says anything directly, you feel the shift. The jokes land differently. The energy changes. The conversations feel slightly off. Your nervous system notices all of it. So it asks, is this worth it? And if belonging has always felt fragile, the answer becomes no. This is why people often grow fastest when they're anonymous, when no one's watching, when expectations are low, when pressure is minimal. But growth eventually brings light, and light reveals. Here's the paradox. The same visibility that scares people is the same visibility that creates opportunity. Being seen brings responsibility, but it also brings leverage. The people who break ceilings don't eliminate the fear of being seen. They outgrow their dependence on approval. They stop needing everyone to understand. They stop explaining themselves into safety. They stop shrinking to stay comfortable. Not aggressively, not arrogantly, quietly. They allow some discomfort. They accept some misunderstanding. They let some relationships change. And that's not easy because the desire to belong is ancient. But here's the reframe that helps. You don't lose belonging when you grow. You exchange environments, and growth always requires a trade. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the real price of higher income. Not money, not effort, but something far more uncomfortable for most people. Responsibility. Chapter 9. Responsibility is the real price of more. Most people think they want more money. What they really want is relief. Relief from stress, relief from pressure, relief from feeling trapped. But here's the part that surprises people when things actually start changing. More income doesn't remove responsibility. It concentrates it. And that's where a lot of people quietly hesitate. Because responsibility sounds noble until it's real. Responsibility means fewer excuses. It means fewer places to hide, fewer people to blame, fewer stories that explain why things aren't working yet. When you don't have money, it's easy to say, I'd do more if I could. I'd make better decisions if I had options. I'd take responsibility once I had resources. But when resources arrive, those statements disappear. And what's left is you, your decisions, your priorities, your follow-through. That level of ownership is heavier than people expect. Freedom weighs more than struggle. Struggle spreads responsibility across circumstances. Freedom gathers it into your hands. This is why some people unconsciously avoid situations where they'd have to decide more. They say they want opportunity, but they avoid positions that require leadership. They say they want freedom, but they resist accountability. They say they want growth, but they hesitate when no one else is in charge. Because being in charge removes comfort. There's no one else to defer to, no one else to blame, no one else to wait for. And that exposure can feel intimidating. Let's make this real. Have you ever noticed how some people stay just below decision-making roles? They're involved, they're helpful, they're smart, but they don't step fully into ownership. They stay close enough to progress to feel engaged, but far enough away to avoid full responsibility. That's not laziness. That's nervous system logic, because ownership activates fear, not fear of failure, fear of self-reliance. Here's the truth most people don't say out loud. More money forces you to confront your own patterns faster. Your discipline, your emotional regulation, your ability to delay gratification, your ability to act without reassurance. That's uncomfortable. So people unconsciously cap themselves at a level where responsibility feels manageable. Not minimal, just manageable. That level becomes their ceiling. Breaking that ceiling doesn't start with earning more. It starts with accepting more ownership before the money arrives, making decisions without guarantees, taking responsibility without applause, acting without external validation. That's the real preparation for more. In the next chapter, we're going to shift into how people actually break through, starting with a subtle but powerful change in the questions they ask themselves. Chapter 10. They stop asking how and start asking who. At some point, people who break through notice something strange about the way they think. They stop obsessing over how. How do I do this perfectly? How do I avoid mistakes? How do I make sure this works? Those questions sound smart. They sound responsible. They sound logical, but they quietly keep you stuck. Because how questions assume something important, that you are already the right person for the outcome. You just need the right instructions. And that's rarely true. The people who break income ceilings eventually realize this. The problem isn't the plan. The problem is the person executing the plan. So the question changes, not, how do I make this work? But, who do I need to become to handle this level? That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. How looks for safety. Who looks for growth. How wants guarantees. Who accepts uncertainty. How waits until it feels ready. Who adapts in motion. Think about it. Every new level requires a new version of you. More income requires better decision-making under pressure, greater emotional control, longer time horizons, fewer emotional reactions. Those aren't tactics, they're traits. You can't Google them. You have to practice them. This is why copying strategies rarely works. People copy what successful people do without copying who they are. They imitate surface behavior without developing internal capacity. And then they wonder why it doesn't stick. Let's make this practical. Have you ever watched someone succeed at something that you technically understand, but still can't replicate? Same information, same tools, different outcome. That's not knowledge. That's identity. That person can tolerate uncertainty longer. They can make decisions faster. They can recover from mistakes without spiraling. They've become someone who can hold the result. People who break ceilings don't wait to feel confident. They act, then grow into the confidence required. They don't say, "I'll do this once I'm ready." They say, "I'll become ready by doing this." That mindset feels reckless to people trained to be careful. But it's not reckless. It's adaptive. Growth isn't a checklist. It's a transformation. And the transformation always comes first. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about what happens after momentum starts and why many people panic when things finally begin to accelerate. Chapter 11. When things speed up, most people slow down. This is one of the strangest patterns you'll ever notice once you start looking for it. People don't usually fail at the beginning. They fail when things start working. When progress is slow, everyone is patient. When results are small, everyone stays hopeful. When nothing is certain, people keep going. But when momentum appears, that's when nervous systems get loud. Opportunities stack. Decisions come faster. Consequences feel heavier. And instead of leaning in, many people hesitate. They slow down right when speed is required. Why? Because acceleration feels like loss of control. When things move slowly, you can overthink. You can adjust. You can second guess. When things speed up, you have to decide. And decision-making reveals something uncomfortable. How much uncertainty you can tolerate. Most people were trained to avoid uncertainty, to minimize risk, to wait for clarity. But clarity rarely comes before movement. It comes from movement. So when momentum shows up, the mind asks, what if I mess this up? What if this is too much? What if I can't maintain this? And those questions don't feel like fear. They feel like realism. But realism at the wrong moment becomes self-sabotage. People cancel meetings they should take. They delay launches they should start. They slow progress they should allow. They tell themselves they're being cautious, but they're actually protecting their nervous system from overwhelm. Here's the truth most people don't expect. Growth is noisy internally, not externally. Internally, your heart rate changes, your thoughts speed up, your emotions intensify, and if you haven't practiced staying calm under expansion, your system hits the brakes. People who break through don't eliminate fear. They build tolerance. They learn to breathe while things move fast. They learn to decide without perfect information. They learn to stay grounded while their environment changes. This is a skill, not a personality trait, and it's one of the most underrated reasons people stay below ceilings. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about risk, not in the dramatic way people usually frame it, but in the quiet way it actually shapes long-term outcomes. Chapter 12. Risk is not the enemy. Playing it too safe is. Most people think risk is the villain in their story. They picture risk as recklessness, as gambling, as losing everything in one bad decision. So they build their lives around avoiding it. They choose the safer option, the predictable option, the option that won't raise eyebrows. And again, this looks responsible. But here's the quiet truth. Avoiding risk doesn't create safety. It creates stagnation. Because there is a type of risk that's far more dangerous than trying and failing. It's the risk of staying exactly the same for a very long time. That risk doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't spike your heart rate. It doesn't trigger alarms. It just slowly costs you years. People who break income ceilings don't suddenly become fearless. They don't love risk. They don't chase danger. They don't enjoy uncertainty. They just stop treating risk like a moral failure. They understand something subtle. Risk is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're leaving the familiar. And the familiar is where ceilings live. Let's reframe risk in a way that actually helps. Risk is tuition. Sometimes you pay tuition with money, sometimes with time, sometimes with embarrassment, sometimes with effort that doesn't pan out. But tuition buys education, and education increases capacity. People who stay under ceilings are often terrified of wasting effort. They want guarantees. They want proof. They want certainty before they move. But guarantees only exist inside systems that don't allow growth. Every meaningful expansion requires a phase where you don't know what you're doing yet. That's not incompetence. That's learning. Here's where things get tricky. People confuse calculated risk with recklessness. Calculated risk is when you understand the downside, accept it, and move anyway. Recklessness is ignoring the downside completely. Most people aren't reckless. They're cautious to the point of paralysis. They ask, what if this fails? But they don't ask, what if this works and I grow into it? They imagine worst-case scenarios vividly and best-case scenarios vaguely. So fear wins by default. People who grow reverse that habit. They don't ignore downside, they just don't let it dominate the decision. They understand that small failures early prevent massive regret later. And regret is the heaviest cost of all. Here's something most people don't realize until it's too late. Playing it safe feels good short-term. It reduces anxiety today, but it compounds dissatisfaction long-term. Because deep down, people know when they're shrinking. They feel it in quiet moments, in boredom, in restlessness, in that sense that life is happening around them instead of through them. Risk, handled well, restores agency. It puts you back in motion. It reintroduces growth. It stretches identity. And identity expansion is what breaks ceilings, not luck. In the next chapter, we're going to move from theory to practice and talk about how people actually raise their internal income thermostat. Not with affirmations or pressure, but with awareness and small shifts that compound. Chapter 13, How People Actually Raise Their Income Thermostat. This is where a lot of books get loud. They start shouting about mindset. They tell you to think bigger. They push affirmations and hype and urgency. We're not doing that. Because raising your income thermostat doesn't happen through force. It happens through familiarity. Your nervous system doesn't change because you yell at it. It changes because it experiences something repeatedly and survives it. So let's talk about how this really works. The income thermostat rises when more starts to feel normal. Not exciting, not stressful, just normal. And the only way that happens is through staying present when your instinct is to pull back. Here's the key moment most people miss. Every time you approach the edge of your current comfort zone, your system sends a signal. It might feel like sudden doubt, a desire to delay, a strong urge to wait and see, an impulse to reduce effort right when things are working. That signal is not a warning. It's a threshold. Most people interpret it as a sign to stop. People who grow interpret it as a sign to stay. Not to push harder, not to force outcomes, just to remain present instead of retreating. This is subtle, but powerful. Raising the thermostat is about not immediately correcting downward. If you make more money than usual, don't rush to justify it. If you receive an opportunity, don't minimize it. If progress accelerates, don't shrink yourself to calm others or yourself. You let the discomfort exist without acting on it. And that's hard, because discomfort demands action. It wants relief. So the old habit says, let's spend this. Let's slow down. Let's make this smaller. The new habit says, let's sit here for a moment. This is how normalization happens, not through dramatic leaps, through quiet tolerance. Here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine someone who's never lifted more than 20 pounds. 30 feels heavy, 40 feels impossible. But if they consistently hold 30 without panic, 30 becomes normal. Then 40 isn't shocking anymore. Income works the same way. Your system needs exposure, not pressure, and exposure only works if you don't retreat. This also means paying attention to language. Listen to how you talk to yourself when things improve. Do you say, this probably won't last? I don't want to mess this up. I should be careful. Those phrases aren't wrong. They're protective. But they also signal the thermostat trying to pull you back. Instead of arguing with them, you notice them. Awareness weakens their grip. Here's the quiet truth. People who raise their thermostat don't feel confident all the time. They feel capable of handling discomfort, capable of learning on the fly, capable of staying present when things stretch them. And capability grows through practice, not belief. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about why chasing money directly often backfires and why the people who break through focus on something else entirely. Chapter 14. Why chasing money pushes it away. This is one of those ideas that sounds backwards until you see it clearly. The people who obsess over money rarely keep it. The people who expand themselves tend to attract it. That's not magic, it's mechanics. Chasing money creates pressure. Pressure narrows thinking. Narrow thinking limits options. When money becomes the goal, every decision feels heavier. Every mistake feels catastrophic. Every delay feels personal. That emotional weight makes people short-sighted. They grab what's close instead of what compounds. They rush instead of position. They react instead of design. This is why chasing money often leads to burnout instead of breakthrough. People take work they shouldn't. They underprice themselves. They say yes to things that drain them because they need the money. And ironically, that neediness lowers their value. The marketplace responds to clarity and capability, not desperation. People who break income ceilings understand something different. Money is not the target, it's the byproduct. The real focus is expansion. Expanding. Skills, judgment, emotional range, decision-making speed. Those things compound. Money follows. Think about it. Have you ever met someone who didn't seem obsessed with money, but always seemed to have it? They weren't careless. They weren't reckless. They just weren't anxious about it. That calm is not personality. It's capacity. They know they can create. They know they can recover. They know they can adapt. So money doesn't feel scarce, even when it fluctuates. This is why two people can make the same amount and live very different lives. One feels trapped, the other feels mobile. Mobility comes from capacity, not cash. Here's where this gets practical. Instead of asking, how do I make more money? People who grow ask, what am I becoming better at? What problems can I solve now that I couldn't before? What decisions can I make faster than I used to? Those questions don't feel as urgent, but they create durability, and durability breaks ceilings. Chasing money is loud, building capacity is quiet, and quiet growth lasts longer. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about one of the most underrated forces in long-term success, consistency, and why it matters far more than motivation ever will. Chapter 15. Consistency is the real confidence. Most people are waiting to feel confident before they act. They think confidence comes first, action comes second. But in real life, it works the other way around. Confidence is not a feeling, it's a memory. It's the memory of keeping promises to yourself, of showing up when you said you would, of doing the thing even when it felt uncomfortable. And those memories are built through consistency, not motivation. Motivation is unreliable. It spikes and crashes. It depends on mood, sleep, stress, and environment. Consistency doesn't care how you feel. It cares what you do. This is why people who break ceilings don't wait for inspiration. They build small, repeatable behaviors that reinforce a new identity. Not dramatic actions, not heroic effort, simple follow-through. They decide, this is who I am now. And then they prove it quietly over and over. Here's why consistency matters so much. Every time you follow through, your nervous system updates its self-image. It says, oh, we do this now. This is normal. This is safe. And when something becomes normal, it stops triggering fear. That's how ceilings lift. Not with a single breakthrough, with 100 small confirmations. This is also why people who rely on motivation feel stuck. They keep restarting, recommitting, re-inspiring themselves. They're always at the beginning. Consistency moves you past the beginning without asking permission. It also builds trust with yourself. And self-trust is more powerful than self-belief. Belief can be borrowed. Trust must be earned. When you trust yourself, decisions get easier. Risk feels manageable. Growth feels possible because you know you'll show up, even if it's messy. That's real confidence. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about a behavior shift that surprises people when they finally experience it. Why those who break through stop explaining themselves. Chapter 16, why they stop explaining themselves. There's a quiet shift that happens when someone truly starts to outgrow their old ceiling. They stop explaining themselves. Not in a rude way, not in an arrogant way, just naturally. Early on, people explain everything. Why they're trying something new, why they're changing direction, why this decision makes sense. They want reassurance. They want understanding. They want permission, and that's normal. When your identity is still forming, external validation feels stabilizing. But as capacity grows, something changes. Explanations start to feel heavy, not because you don't care what people think, but because you no longer need agreement to move forward. You've proven enough to yourself. Here's something most people don't notice until it happens to them. Explaining is often a form of self-protection. It's a way of saying, please don't judge me. Please understand. Please don't pull away. And when you're trying to grow, that instinct can quietly slow you down because explanations invite opinions. Opinions invite doubt. Doubt invites hesitation. People who break ceilings learn when to be quiet. They don't announce every plan. They don't seek consensus. They don't workshop their future with people who are still living in their past. They move first. They explain later, if at all. This doesn't mean becoming secretive or cold. It means becoming selective. You stop asking everyone to walk you through your decisions. You trust your own judgment more. You accept that not everyone needs to understand your path. That's a big emotional step because silence feels vulnerable at first. No backup, no reassurance, no applause, just action. And action without explanation builds a different kind of strength. It teaches you that you can stand on your own decisions, that you don't collapse without validation, that progress doesn't require permission. This is one of the clearest signs someone is outgrowing an old ceiling. They become quieter, more focused, more deliberate. Not because they're hiding, because they're building. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the final shift, one that ties everything together. Why people who break through stop chasing quick wins and start playing longer games. Chapter 17, the people who break through play longer games. There's a moment in every growth journey where impatience quietly gives way to clarity. It doesn't happen because someone told you to be patient. It happens because you finally see how things actually work. People who stay under ceilings tend to play short games. They want quick relief, fast results, immediate proof. And that makes sense. When life feels tight, urgency feels necessary. But urgency also narrows perspective. It pushes people toward short-term fixes, reactive decisions, temporary wins that don't compound. People who break through eventually slow their timeline, even as their action increases. They stop asking, how fast can this work? And start asking, how strong can this become? That single shift changes everything. Longer games reward positioning over pressure, consistency over intensity, direction over speed. People who play longer games don't panic when results lag. They don't overcorrect at the first sign of resistance. They don't abandon direction just because momentum pauses. They expect friction. They understand that anything worth building has a lag. This is why they look calm while others rush. They've detached their identity from immediate outcomes. They know they're in motion, and motion compounds. Here's something subtle but powerful. When you play a longer game, you stop forcing doors. You stop chasing every opportunity. You start choosing. And choice is power. You begin saying no more often, not because you're rigid, because you're intentional. Long game thinking also reduces anxiety, because not every day has to prove something. Progress is allowed to be uneven. Learning is allowed to be messy. Growth is allowed to take time. That patience is not passive. It's strategic. It allows you to build something that lasts instead of something that spikes. This is why people who break ceilings often seem less rushed, even when they're making bigger moves. They trust the process because they understand it. They know who they're becoming, and they're willing to let that version of themselves catch up to the results. This brings us to the final realization. Breaking the 100K barrier, or any barrier, is not about money, it's about alignment. Alignment between identity and action, capacity and opportunity, vision and patience. When those line up, ceilings don't shatter, they dissolve. Conclusion. The ceiling was never real. Nothing outside you suddenly changes. The world doesn't announce your breakthrough. The economy doesn't shift in your favor overnight. People don't suddenly treat you differently. You do. You stop shrinking. You stop self-correcting downward. You stop negotiating with old limits. You allow yourself to expand, calmly, steadily, deliberately. And once that expansion becomes familiar, income follows naturally, not dramatically, not magically, inevitably. Bonus chapter. How to live this without turning it into pressure. Before we end, let's slow down, because the fastest way to ruin everything you just heard is to turn it into a self-improvement checklist. That's what most people do. They hear something meaningful, then immediately ask, okay, what do I need to fix about myself? That mindset quietly recreates the same ceiling. So this final chapter isn't about doing more, it's about relating differently to what's already happening in your life. Because real change doesn't come from intensity, it comes from alignment. Let's make this practical in a way that doesn't feel heavy. First, stop measuring yourself in outcomes. Most people measure their progress by results alone. Income, numbers, external wins. That's backwards. Outcomes lag. They always do. If you measure yourself only by outcomes, you'll feel behind even while you're growing. Instead, start measuring yourself by behavior under discomfort. Ask yourself, did I avoid shrinking today? Did I delay less than I used to? Did I stay present when things felt uncertain? Did I make one decision from my future self instead of my past self? Those are real metrics. They don't show up on a bank statement immediately, but they are the cause of every meaningful increase that ever will. Second, catch the pullback moment. This is the most important skill in the entire book. Not action, not strategy, awareness. Pay attention to the exact moment you feel the urge to play it safe, delay, over-explain, soften your ambition, make something smaller than it needs to be. That moment is gold, because that's where the ceiling lives. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to override it. You just need to not obey it automatically. Pause, breathe, stay. Even 30 seconds longer than you used to is progress. That's how thermostats rise. Third, normalize expansion, not drama. A lot of people secretly believe growth has to feel dramatic. Big decisions, big risks, big moves. That belief keeps them waiting. In reality, most expansion is boring from the outside. It looks like saying no when you normally explain, following through when motivation is low, letting momentum continue instead of interrupting it, staying calm while things speed up. That's it. No speeches, no reinvention, no announcement, just quieter, steadier behavior. And over time, that behavior becomes identity. Fourth, let the old version of you be outgrown. This is emotional and it matters. You don't need to kill your old self. You don't need to judge it. You don't need to be embarrassed by it. It got you here, but you don't need to keep consulting it. Every time you ask, what would I normally do? You reinforce the ceiling. Instead, start asking, what would the version of me who can handle more do next? Not forever. Just once. Then again. Then again. That's how transitions actually happen. Finally, trust that this is working, even when it's quiet. The most dangerous moment in growth is when things feel calm but not explosive. That's when people quit, change direction, doubt themselves. But calm is often a sign that your nervous system is adjusting, that you're stabilizing at a higher level, that expansion is becoming normal. Don't interrupt that. Let it settle. Because once more feels normal, less becomes impossible. One last thought. You don't need to rush. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to force a breakthrough. You just need to stop returning to what's familiar when you're clearly meant for more. Ceilings don't break when you fight them. They disappear when you outgrow them.